Greetings, Eagle family. Um, Good afternoon to you. Welcome to our seventh installment of Staying Clear Through Crisis, entitled Demanding Our Rights. In light of everything that's been happening around the country, we felt that this was a very important conversation to have with our young men. And, we have a lot of things to cover, and so we'll jump right in. So let me begin by introducing our esteemed panel. I will start with our students. First young man I'd like to introduce is a rising senior at Eagle, Staten Island, Mr. Kareem Alkassar, who is also an MBK fellow. Second, I'd like to introduce Mr. Justin Smith, who is also a rising senior at Eagle Academy, Ocean Hill. And the last student I'd like to introduce is Mr. Troy Williams, a rising senior at Eagle Academy, Southeast Queens. And all of these young men not only are outstanding leaders within their school community, but they're also outstanding leaders amongst the Eagle Academy network. And they are a part of the Eagle Ambassadors program, where we bring a collection of young men from across the network to address issues like we're going to talk about now. And so our other two guests in this very important conversation in demanding our rights, particularly as it relates to interaction with law enforcement, I'd like to introduce Sergeant Hakim, who is a 24-year veteran of the MTA and who's going to provide some insight for our young men on what to do when encountered with law enforcement, right? So many young men lose their lives and are violated as a result of these stops. And so he's going to provide some insight around that. And our last, but certainly not least guest is Mr. Keith White, Esquire, who is the principal attorney at the Keith White Law Firm. And he's going to provide some insight around the legal rights that our young men have in the event that they are violated. So before we get into our conversation, as we do with all of our Staying Clear Through Crisis episodes, we will begin with a libation. And again, for those that do not know the purpose of libation, it is to pay respect to those who are no longer here, and in the hopes that their spirit and their memory will continue to drive us forward. And we've poured libations for a number of people over the past few weeks. And today I'd like to pour a libation for two former Eagle Academy students who tragically lost their lives over the past month. And these were young men that I knew and who had a love for Eagle Academy. And I certainly invite their spirit and their energy to be a part of this conversation today. And so the first young man I'd like to pour libation for is Mr. Ronald Smith, again, former student at Eagle Academy in the Bronx, and Mr. Kareem Ross, again, both young men that had fantastic spirits, and I think about them every single day. So I wanted to pour libation for them. We say, I say. So again, brothers, thank you so much for joining us for this very important conversation. You know, since all of this has started, there's been a lot of panels and a lot of discussions around the country about, people giving their thoughts and their insights. And, very rarely do we get a chance to hear from young people, though, particularly young men of color, right, who are directly impacted by the negativity that we see at the hands of those police that are not doing the right thing. We actually planned on doing a show in regard around this demanding our rights, but obviously with the recent events, it calls for the need for it elevated even more. So young men, right, I'll just kind of throw this question out there for you guys, and anybody can start. We really want to know, what are your thoughts about the recent events around the country? Why do you think young people of all races have been so involved in the protests? Why don't we start with you?
Just seeing all the protests, it was just amazing. And seeing how all the races together and just able to collaborate and actually make sure that our voice is heard at the end of the day. Because you could see in years past that the Black voices weren't heard. They were overlooked many times, and it's just amazing that we got that chance that we're finally heard, and we can move forward with this instead of stopping like how we have in the past.
Absolutely. Kareem and Justin, how about you?
So I believe that the situations that have been going on, they've been going on forever now. People are tired. Young people, youth, are just tired. They see this every day on the news. They see this every day through their social media, scrolling through Instagram, looking at Snapchat stories. And we're just tired. We're fed up with all this abuse and all this anger that has just been built in. And now, when Mr. Floyd passed, we just exploded with that rage against police brutality, and we're actually now we are more powerful than ever now because we're equipped with information like no other.
Yes, sir. Brother Smith, how about you, brother? What's your insight on the recent events around the country?
So obviously as a collective, the Black community has been going through struggles and trials and tribulations for the past couple 400 years. So it's really thanks to the youth now that we have technology and like cameras that we can document this and actually fight it. And with the youth and technology, we can like actually push for change and get our message across way greater. So it's important that the youth is involved so that everybody can, make a difference.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right, right? When we talk about, abuse at the hands of police, that's something that's been a part of our community that even goes back to, post-slavery, right? For you guys that know your history, right? You know that even following the Civil War, the whole idea of even establishing a police department was to, right, target the Black community, right? And we've suffered for many, many years. But with the advent of social media, as you said, it's now being recorded and it's being put out there. And so it's been great to see so many young people come together in protest of this, right? Any change that's ever taken place in this country has been spearheaded by young people, right? And so even for the young people that are listening, never think that you are too young to be a part of this, right? To be a part of this revolution. It's interesting. We talk about young people. Fred Hampton, who was one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, had his life taken away at the age of 21. And at 21, he was one of the leaders of the party. And one of the things that he says that I think is very, very important is he said, you cannot jail, you can jail a revolutionary, but you cannot jail a revolution. And so what that means is that many people play parts in the revolution to be a united force. And so again, man, I thank you guys and I thank all of the young people that are out there protesting, making a difference. Now, again, I know you guys had a series of questions, right, as in particular to Sergeant Hakim and to Mr. White, as it relates to what to do if stopped by the police, right, and how do you survive an encounter, and then what do you do if, in fact, you are able to survive and hold those officers accountable. So, again, brothers, I'll let you kind of jump right in because, again, I know there's a lot of questions that you had.
All right, so for Mr. Hakim, what are ways I can protect myself during a police stop, and how do I make sure I survive?
Well, if you're stopped by the police, sometimes they have a reason, sometimes they don't. Most of the times when an officer is supposed to stop someone, there's a reason. They have some sort of reasonable suspicion that crime has been committed or is about to be committed, so they want to stop and interview. This is not the case all the time, but this is the textbook reason why you would be stopped. So if say you're coming from school and you have done absolutely nothing, you have done nothing but come to school, you get ready to take the train and go home, and you're being stopped, just listen to what the officer has to say, be respectful, don't disrespect him or disrespect her. Listen, you have a right to ask why you are being stopped. You do have that right to say, how come you're stopping me? Don't do any sudden movements that would make them, and you see this so much, because so many officers, they're nervous wrecks. They're very scared. So any sudden move you may make, it could cost you your life. Just don't do anything sudden. Don't go into your pockets. If they ask you for ID, tell the officer, I'd like to get my ID out of my right-hand pocket. Is it okay if I can do that? You know, you want to try to make that encounter as peaceful as possible. Even though some officers can really try to escalate things, because sometimes they want to gauge you and escalate things with you so that there's a reason for them to, okay, now I got him. Now I can lock them up. Now I can give them a summons. Because a lot of times it's just a head game. But you have to be the bigger person and just be respectful. Yes, officer, I'd like to see some ID. You're not entitled to show him anything if you didn't do anything. But if there's a violation or you're getting arrested, then you have to produce some form of ID. And if you don't have ID, then they can take you to the precinct and have you there for hours until they can find out who you are. Do a series of phone calls, or maybe even your fingerprints if your fingerprints are on file. But just don't say anything out of pocket. Don't disrespect the officer, even if they may be trying to tear you apart, because you really wanna live to see another day. You know, you can always complain about that officer through legal means, administratively through their department, and if it has to go further, then you'll hire yourself an attorney like Attorney Keith White. But just don't be confrontational. Always keep your hands where the officers can see them. Do not give them a reason. Don't give them a reason at all. And hopefully there's some witnesses there that is recording. I'm a big advocate of that. And recording police officers is not illegal. As long as you're not interfering with their arrest process or not interfering with their interview, and you're at a safe distance, that can be recorded. So, you know, it's through recordings that we've seen some of the monstrosities that are still happening to this very day. And, you know, we in the law enforcement community, even though I'm retired and still working with the MTAPD Guardians, we work towards legislation that makes these officers accountable when they do stuff that is definitely wrong. So again, no sudden movements. Don't say anything out of pocket. Be respectful. Call him or her officer. It doesn't make you any less of a human being to be respectful. You don't want to escalate anything. There are respectful cops that are doing their job and will be respectful to you. Then there are others that are just disrespectful. So keep that in mind. When you encounter the officers, just be respectful, be safe. Don't do anything that will make that officer uncomfortable or feel like they're threatened by you. And that's word of mouth, your movements, anything like that.
Yeah. Those were great tips, brother, especially the one about carrying ID. You know, I think all young men should carry ID with them, all men, black men, right? We need to carry ID, right? Because just off of that, the police can detain you, right? If you do not have ID and they cannot prove who you are, right? So, or you cannot prove who you are. So again, young brothers, please make sure that you are carrying ID when you are out there. Anytime you leave your home. You know, it's interesting, right? Because for our young brothers, we have to have these conversations, right? And I know some people say, oh man, you know, we got to talk to them about how to survive police encounters. And we certainly do. And thank you, brother, for providing those tips, right? For our young brothers who are listening and who are part of the panel. But the question that I always think about, and I like to kind of pose this to Troy, right? Is this, right? Is we talk about how we should interact with the police, but very rarely do you hear suggestions around how the police should interact with us, right? So the question I have for you, Troy, is, in your opinion, how should police approach us to avoid a confrontation? what suggestions would you have as a young person so that they can be more effective at protecting the community?
A lot of times when I talk to a lot of my brothers and they have conversations about stuff like this, they said police officers often just pull up to them, put their hand on their gun. It's just if in that situation we're automatically nervous, so we're gonna be stuttering, we're gonna be shaking a little bit. We're nervous, so you should try to make us comfortable, and we'll have no problem focusing on what we have to say, and we can tell you what you need to know. Because it really makes us nervous when we see your hand on a gun, because we see it on the news again and time again. A black male gets shot, and we don't know what's going to happen to us. So just how you approach us on the first two steps, we're watching, even though we're supposed to be focused on trying to make it home alive, we're thinking about so many different things. Like, what's going to happen if I say this? What's going to happen if I do this? What happen if I reach my wallet, my keys, anything? So just try to make sure that we're calm while y'all talk to us, because it's we kind of have so many, we think about so many things, and we get sometimes we get emotional in our head and think, yo, what if I can't see my mom again? It's like those thoughts that really went through our minds, and it's really hard for us. So of course we're gonna be kind of shaky, nervous. It's not that we're hiding something sometimes, because a lot of kids in New York isn't really that bad. Not a lot of African American boys aren't that bad. They're really trying to work it somewhere, but we're just gonna be nervous off rip.
Troy, I believe you 100%. You know, there's a saying: if you want respect, you have to give it. That's something that our parents and our elders teach us. You know, and I make no excuses for anyone. People are people, whether they work in a fast food restaurant, whether they work in a clothing store, or whether they're working law enforcement. And there's all different types of people. The thing with law enforcement is you must be held to a higher standard, and you have to think that way to be held to a higher standard. So being held to a higher standard, it would make me want to present myself to you in a respectful way. Because look, let's face it, I want to go home to, I know that just my mere presence, especially in communities of I don't like to use the word minorities, in so-called urban communities, police have a bad reputation. So an officer should understand that, and should say to themselves, this is a young person. He or she's never going to forget this encounter. I remember when I was young, I can remember every encounter I ever had with law enforcement for doing nothing. Those are things that you never forget. So yes, they should treat everyone with respect right off the rip. Does it happen? It doesn't happen a lot. It really doesn't. And when they come with their hand on their gun, they're really making a liability for themselves. Unfortunately, from what you see on the press so many times, they get over and they get away with it because they always use that key word, I felt for my life. I felt that my life was threatened. I felt, that in that excuse, it seems like when they're in front of a grand jury, they always seem to buy that. But a lot of officers, they're like that. Most of them are not. Most of them talk to people the way they should be. And it's sad, man, that, officers, you should speak to a 90-year-old lady the same way you speak to a 16 or 17-year-old. When I was working, I was a field training officer, and I always taught officers, somebody 95 can hurt you the same way as somebody 15. So give that level of respect right off the rip, and everything should be fine. But, a lot of times it's not like that. And those are the bad experiences that we see a lot. A lot of these officers, they go in to heavy communities of color and so-called, minorities. And, they don't want to be there. They really don't want to be there. They would rather be somewhere nice and cushy And instead of them saying to themselves, you know, listen, man, I'm here to protect and serve. You know, whether the public likes me or not, it doesn't matter. If they like you, oh, that's fine and well. But if they don't, you still have a job to do, and you still have to be respectful to the community that you're serving. So yeah, it's you hate to hear stories like that, and no, you shouldn't be approaching somebody, especially if you're just going to interview them. There's no reason at all.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are times where officers may get a gun call, you know, call a gun run. You know, a man with a gun, 5 foot, whatever, you know, and then if an officer is looking at a group and that group may be at that same location, sometimes an officer uses caution, but not in general conversation and interview. That should never be.
Yeah, and again, and thank you for mentioning that, Troy, right? Because the approach alone, right? Respect is mutual, right? And so, you know, often, as you stated, Troy, right? If an officer approaches you in a negative way, right, that within itself is going to spark a conflict, right? Is there anything that Justin or Kareem you wanted to add in terms of what advice would you have for an officer on how to approach young men that they see outside?
And Troy and Sergeant Hakim said it all. It's all about respect. You give respect, you get respect. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Brother White, we're just going to shift to you really quickly, right? So we talked about, you know, things that young men should and shouldn't do to survive a police encounter. So the question that we have for you is, what if a student is, or a young person, or even a brother such as ourselves, what should they do if they're placed under arrest? Should they remain silent until they speak to an attorney? If they're not under arrest, are they required to speak to a police officer?
So Peace, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. But let me say, I think that the framework for a police encounter is probably the most problematic part of this conversation. If you're placed under arrest, you're never forced to have a conversation with police. In fact, it's often to your detriment. And what I mean by that is, if you're arrested by a police officer in a uniform, right? There's a different format typically for how that's going to play out than if you're arrested by a detective or if you're encountered by detectives. In any case, you should not give any statements. A lot of times, especially detectives, what they'll do is they'll ask you some pedigree information. You give the pedigree information, which is your name and your ID. But then they'll try to have some small talk. And in that small talk, they'll try to make themselves seem like they're friends. And in those conversations, that's where things get dangerous, and that's where things happen that are unfortunate. And so my advice to anyone who's ever placed under arrest is to be quiet. You give your name, your ID, and when they start the small talk, who's your favorite team? Oh, I used to live around that neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. They start all that small talk. You say, I need my lawyer. If you're a minor, right. if you're a minor, you say, I need my parent and I need my lawyer. And that's all. That's the only thing that you should be saying. And that's a discipline. The reason why that's a discipline is because you can be sitting for hours, right? And at some point, you know, you're going to want to ask questions. You're going to want to engage in a conversation, but it's a discipline to not say anything. And the reason why I say that, I'll be quick. The reason why I say this is because I've had personal examples of clients where they've been arrested for something that they didn't do. They've been taken into a precinct and they've been questioned, and they start getting nervous and they start talking about stuff that had nothing to do with the reason why they were even taken into the precinct. And it becomes a charge for something else. And so it's very, it can't be overstated enough to be quiet, to say nothing except give your name and your ID.
With that, you say, Mr. White, you said that ID is one of the most important things. Sergeant, we want another question that a lot of the brothers had was, what happened if you can't produce ID?
If you can't produce ID, let's make it clear that you are not required to walk with ID. It's not a law. You should have ID. If you can't produce ID, then an officer may ask you for phone numbers. Well, give me a telephone number to your mother or somebody that knows you. Or they may just take you down to the precinct until they can find out who you are, or have your parent come up, and vouch for you, so on and so forth. But you should always carry ID. Like Brother Barnette was saying, just based on, Most High forbid you cross the street and you get struck by a vehicle and you have no ID. Brother, you're going to go to the morgue and you're pretty much going to sit there for a day or two while your parents or guardians fill out missing persons reports. So it's you want to have some form of ID. It just, go to New York State, it's the non-driver's ID. You should have that minimally. But if you don't have it, they're going to find out one way or another who you are. They're going to find out. Law enforcement will find that out.
It's
So
because
don't lie to them, because that's another charge.
It's just because a lot of my brothers, we play football, and our field is kind of far away. So we put our bags down. We could go somewhere else and say, "Oh, I'm going to go to the store." Okay, so it's kind of like we can get ID in places, and we get put in that situation where we don't have an ID on us, but we have ID. So what would you say with that communication with the officer? Because there's a lot of times where they don't believe you. They feel like you're lying. They're trying to get over on them. What would you do in that situation?
Just talk to them. Some officers will be reasonable, and some are just not. That's a reality when you're dealing with law enforcement officers. When you're dealing with police, some are gonna be all right, and then some are just not, man. But if you talk to them and you tell them, listen, man, I don't have my ID, produce a phone number. They may believe you. Some may not even want to go through the hassle. But again, why are they stopping you? You understand what I'm saying? If there's no reason to stop you, there's no reason for them to be asking you for that. There's no reason. But if they do, just know that they can take you down to the precinct and until they can find out who you are. And like Brother Barnett said, that could take hours. And it's a major inconvenience, and you don't want to put yourself through that.
Now, as young as people, right, in society, right, we have rights, right? And I know, Brother Kareem, you had a question for Sergeant Hakim around an act, right? And you wanted some clarity around that. When you want to pose that question to Sergeant Hakim?
Yeah, it's actually for Sergeant Hakim and Keith White, and either of them can answer it. And it's the question about what is the Right to Know Act, and when should we use it?
So the right to know act is an act that was passed, I believe, in 2018 in New York City. And the Right to Know Act is essentially a two-pronged act. One is when you're approached by a police officer, you have the right to know who is approaching you. So you have the right to know his name or his or her name, shield number, and command. You have that right to know. Also, the second part of the Right to Know Act is you have the right to know whether or not when they approach you to search you, whether to search you or to search your place of residence. You have a right to know whether or not they have a warrant. You have a right to know whether or not there is probable cause. So basically, the right empowers you to ask certain questions when you are approached. And the reason why the public policy that informs the Right to Know Act is that the concept of policing evolved from the slave catcher, the slave patrols, right? And so the concept of policing has typically, what's been problematic about the concept of policing has been that it's been about class control. It hasn't necessarily been about protecting communities from one another within a community, but protecting one community from another community. And that is as a form of class control. So as we start to develop and progress in society, we start to see that that's problematic. And we need to be able to have our questions answered the same way that we're questioned. So that's the kind of like the subtext to the Right to Know Act.
You know, to build on top of that, you know, if an officer stops you and they think that there's criminal activity, you know, that you're involved with, you know, they're supposed to give you all of their identification. By law, they're supposed to have cards on them. They're supposed to have business cards on them that has their name, their shield number, and the command in which they work out of. You know, so they should give this to you when you ask for it. Will they do it all the time? No, but they're supposed to. And also, if an officer stops you and they feel that you may be armed and dangerous, and this is something that we didn't touch on. You know, all officers have the right to frisk you. A frisk is different than a search. Even though I know Attorney White have seen, it's a real thin line between a frisk and a search. But a frisk is only to check to see if you have weapons that are a danger to that officer. And that's all it's supposed to do. A quick pat down, listen, for my safety and yours, let me just pat you down, boom, 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 and that's it. But then a lot of times they're patting you down, they're putting their hands, they're digging in your pockets, and then they come up with this, oh, you have marijuana, this, oh, you have this, oh, you have that. And, you know, that happens, unfortunately, a lot. But just remember that a frisk is different. It's only supposed to be when there is a reasonable suspicion that you are armed and you're dangerous. That's it. You know, I remember, just to relate a story. I was about 18, 19 years old, and I was in a cast. I was in a car accident. And I left around from one of my friend's courts, and I'm walking home to my building in Brookline houses. And it says had to be about maybe 12, maybe quarter after 12 in the morning. Car rolls up, three male whites get out, just rushed me, searching me, checking me. Hey, you got anything on you? You have anything? I just kept my mouth closed, man. I felt like totally violated. I can't say I felt like I was raped because I can't compare. But I was violated because it was nothing that I could do. And then after they searched me and found nothing, they said, okay, have a good night, and left. And just left. And I just stood there like, wow.
If I can, I know there's other questions. So if I can just respond to that just a little bit, Mr. Barnette.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, Sergeant Hakim. And I think I want to share with the young brothers that are watching this, and with Troy, Justin, and Kareem, that it's important for us to be able to talk about those types of incidents, unpack them, because those are trauma.
Yeah, man.
What it teaches us to do, it hardens us. It hardens us in a way that's destructive, and it presents in different ways, and it makes us try to be hard with one another. It makes us try to prove our toughness with one another. And it's important for us to be able to take those incidents. I'm sure we've all had those incidents where we've been spoken to a certain way by the state. And when I say the state, I mean law enforcement or police, spoken to a certain way or treated a certain way that was either disrespectful or unpleasant. And what it does is it gives you a lens towards the state and towards power that has you, that can traumatize you. And I want us to deal with our trauma when it comes to this, because the problem is not us. I think we need to understand that the problem is not us. The problem is not any of you brilliant brothers on this panel or any of the brilliant brothers and sisters that are watching this. The problem is not us. And I think that it's important for us to make sure that we're calling out and naming what's happening. Sorry.
I think that's an excellent point. And thank you for even providing some clarity around the right to know act and even the difference between a frisk and a search, right? Because I think often those officers that are not, right, doing their jobs the way that they need to be, they play off of the ignorance of those who may not know, right? And so it's important that you guys know what your rights are, because when you are violated, what we've often gotten used to, because it's happened to us so historically so much, is that we just want to survive. And so if we survive, we often don't follow up to ensure that those officers are held accountable. And in order to hold them accountable, we got to make sure that we know exactly what our rights are. So thank you for providing some insight around that. And I know Justin has a question, particularly for you, Brother Hakim, because we have so many young men, right? These guys are rising seniors. They may be in a car, right? Every stop doesn't necessarily involve being stopped on the street. So, Brother Justin, you had a question in regards to traveling in a car for Sergeant Hakim. You're on mute, brother.
Sorry about that. What are my rights if I'm stopped in a car, and am I a passenger?
And you are a passenger?
Yeah, and if I'm a passenger.
Well, let me start with the driver. Is this a regular car stop? If it's just a normal car stop, you accidentally went through the light, or say you didn't go through any light, you're just being stopped. The driver has to produce his driver's license or her driver's license, insurance. Driver's license and insurance, that has to always be produced. If you're a passenger, there's no reason for the officer to even talk to you, to be quite honest. There's no legal reason for him to talk to you or her to talk to you. If a crime has occurred with that car, or they perceived it to occur with that car, or that car is described as a car that was just involved in some sort of crime or something to that effect, then the officer is going to question everybody that's in that car. But a regular basic, man, I ran a stop sign, there's no reason for that officer to ask you for anything, because you're just a passenger. A lot of times, man, we don't know our rights, and that's where we get violated. But there's no reason. I mean, Attorney White, you can build on top of that.
Well, I do want to say something really quickly. So there's something called constructive possession. And it's something that you need to know what constructive possession means. Constructive possession is when you're not necessarily physically in possession of something, but it's in close enough proximity that it can be considered yours. And what the problem with constructive possession, and this is why I don't get in just anybody's car. And I would encourage you guys to think about this. Don't just get somebody that you don't know. I mean, obviously not an Uber or a cab, but somebody that you don't know. A few guys pull up and say, "Hey, let's get in the car, let's ride." There are certain questions that you need to ask. Who's the owner of the car? What's in the car? And what's the car been used for? The reason why I say that is because if you get in a car, you get pulled over, police find a gun in the glove compartment or in some other stash spot inside of the car, then everyone inside the car can be charged with constructive possession of a weapon, which is a felony, right? And so it's very important for you to be very aware of what's in your proximity at all times. If there are drugs in the car, if the car was used for a crime, and there's proximity between the time of the crime and you being in the car, you can be roped up into an indictment or into something else, a conspiracy. So I would say, I would say that, be very mindful of, while you have your rights to not say anything, there are things that can jam you up just by being in proximity to a crime.
Mr. White, one of the questions, I know you said the word indictment. One of the questions was, what is the difference between arrest,
have pronounced that indictment, acquitment, and a conviction. Right. So the difference between an arrest, an arraignment, an indictment, an acquittal, and a conviction. So an arrest is when there is a suspicion that you committed a crime, and so the police will place you under arrest or place someone under arrest. When placed under arrest, that person is then informed of their charges at their arraignment. When a person is arraigned, they go before a court, before a judge, and the judge tells them what the charges are against them. They also will tell them if there's a bail or if there's not a bail, what are the conditions of them being released from police custody. After the arraignment, if it's a felony charge, the case goes to what's called the grand jury. A grand jury is a panel of people who will hear what the charges are and decide whether or not there is enough evidence to move the case forward to an indictment, which means that the case will go forward as a felony case. An acquittal is when, after either a bench trial or a jury trial, either a jury or a judge decide that after hearing all of the evidence, that there isn't enough evidence there isn't enough evidence to find someone guilty. And a conviction is when the judge, if it's a bench trial or a jury, decide that someone is guilty of a crime after hearing all the evidence during a trial, and that person is guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
Thank you for providing that clarity. I know a lot of young people may not know the difference in an arrest, a conviction, acquittal, and again, the more you know, the more that you're equipped with, the better it is that you'll be able to handle these type situations. Brother Justin, you had something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Hakim also. Leading on to the next, topic. Is it safe to necessarily pull out your phone if the police stops you? And what are your rights if you do? And can you be arrested for filming something quote unquote inappropriate?
No, there's no law that states you cannot record the police. As long as you're not interfering with their arrest process, their interview process, meaning you're not up in the officer's face saying, "Oh, I got you, officer, I got you," long as you're not in their face and you're at a safe distance, it's not illegal for you to record. Is it safe to pull out your phone? Brother, I would say in front of a nervous, wrecked, scared cop, that could cost you your life. Because you may see something that's a total violation, and you're like, "Oh man, I gotta pull up, I gotta get most of our phones is attached to us." You go make a movement for your phone, and then he lays you out. And that's something, man, that we want to avoid at all costs. Because
it's important to be self-conscious. Yeah.
You got to be self-conscious of that. If you can on a DL take that phone out and record, why not? If the officer's doing the right thing, he wouldn't or she wouldn't mind being recorded. If you're doing the right thing, there's no reason. You see all the videos, the officers like, "Get that phone out of my face, get that phone out of my face." It's the stupidest thing in the world. It's a confrontation that they're just trying to escalate. Just move back. If you ever encounter that, and officers like, just move back. That's all. No problem, officer. Just move back and zone it right in high definition. Because it's a check for them. This is why a lot of departments, except for those small little hick towns, got to wear body cameras now. Because even though we have seen where the video doesn't lie, some officers are still exonerated, man, for stuff that's just blatantly outright, wrong. But for your safety, don't pull anything out if you're around an officer and they're staring at you and you like, "Yeah, I just want to record it," because that can be seen as a threatening move. And then, you don't want to get shot and injured over something like that. you know, because they'll go to a jury and you know, a jury will be like, oh, well, that does seem reasonable. You know how they are, and next thing you know, you're dead and nobody cares. So you got to just be careful when you're doing that. But no, there's no law against that. There's none whatsoever.
Just want to add real quick, right? Like, so when it comes to the videos, right, and I'm glad you provided some explanation around that. I've seen things on social media, right, where certain people might say, you know, well, how you gonna pull out a phone and not get involved, right? You definitely don't want to get involved. Like, that's the one thing that I'll say, right? Because again, as Sergeant Hakim said, those officers will lay you out, and they'll be justified in doing so. And not only that, right, there's no, to me, I credit those brothers and sisters, right, who pull out those phones and record, right? Because officers will try to intimidate you and make it seem like you don't have a right to do that. So as long as you are doing it in a safe manner, you know, again, it's helpful, and right, but make sure that you're smart and make sure that you're safe. Brother Kareem, we talked about, you know, being stopped on the street if you walk in, being stopped in a car. There's something in particular you wanted to ask Brother White in regards to, what if the police come to my house? What are my rights around that?
So yeah, that question has been bugging me and been bugging everybody that I know. That's a big topic discussion everybody has. And basically, what rights do I have if an officer comes to my home? Do they need a warrant to enter my home? What are some of the different types of warrants that we have to be aware of?
So if an officer comes to your home, they do need a warrant to enter the home. However, if there is some imminent danger, there appears to be some imminent danger, or there seems to be an emergency occurring, then they can enter at that point. But typically, they will need either your permission or a warrant. So what often happens is there's some report of some issue going on. And police officers will come to the door, and you have the option. If they don't have a warrant, they don't have a search warrant or an arrest warrant or an I-card for someone, then you have the right to say, you know, no, you can't come in. I'm not answering any questions. If they provide a warrant, they have to let you see the warrant. You can't just wave a piece of paper in front of you and say that I have a warrant. You need to be able to see the warrant, and the warrant needs to identify the location or the address or the person in order for it to be effectual. So I would say that, you know, that those are things that you need to see if police come to your door. If they knock on your door, they either need probable cause that something's happening right then and there. There's an emergency that requires them to come into the residence. They need a warrant, a search warrant, or an arrest warrant, or what's called an I-card for an individual.
A great example of that, a story that would attach that, is the Breonna Taylor case that happened just about less than a month ago. I'm not too familiar with the details, but I know that it was a couple cops that just knocked down the door with no warrant and nothing, and they shot her about 8 times or 20 times.
Not just, what's really also problematic about that case is that the people that they were allegedly looking for were already in custody. So I would encourage you, brothers, like Breonna Taylor is a particularly egregious case. There are lots of them, but I would encourage you, brothers, to look up a woman named Eleanor Bumpurs. Eleanor Bumpurs is a case that still to this day, you know, it just troubles me. It troubles my heart, and I need, you know, it's something that I'm still processing. And so I'd ask you guys to look her up, Eleanor Bumpurs, and then compare and contrast that case with Breonna Taylor, with Sandra Bland, and many of our sisters. I think that a lot of times, you know, Black men are absolutely a target, right, by scared police and state officers, but Black women are as well. And I think that we need to start examining those cases as well.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Brother White. The three most recent incidences that we're talking about, right? Ahmaud Arbery, um, Sister Taylor, and then Brother George Floyd, right? Eerily, those are connected to very similar cases, right? Like you said, Eleanor Bumpers, very similar to Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, right? And George Floyd, eerily similar to Eric Garner, right? And so, you know, again, the more you know, the better, right? So I just want to shift the question back to you, Mr. White. So we talked about the different stops, right? We said if you stopped on the street, you stopped in a car, police come to your house, we know what to do. But in some cases, right, our rights are still violated, right? So the question that I have for you, right, and that you can just answer for the young men is, how can youth get involved in addressing misconduct by police? What is the Civilian Complaints Review Board, and how is it important that we regularly attend these meetings?
So the Civilian Complaint Review Board is the Civilian Complaint Review Board, or the CCRB, is a civilian accountability measure that is supposed to provide accountability to the police in their procedures and practices. So what happens is, if you have an encounter with police and the encounter, they violate your rights, or they do something else that leads to your rights being violated, you can file a complaint with the Civilian Complaint Review Board. They will interview you. They will interview the officer that was engaged in this conduct, and they will provide a ruling. That ruling will help you if you engage in a lawsuit, if you sue the police officer. That ruling will help you if you're seeking to see that police officer penalized. And so the Civilian Complaint Review Board is an accountability measure. I think that one of the other things that young people should do and can do is they need to spend a lot of time. You'll find that many of the problematic officers in a precinct are not, they're not acting in a silo. They're not doing this to one person. They're doing it to multiple people. And if you can share your experiences with one another, then you can bring a group complaint to the precinct, to the commanding officer, to the executive officer of the precinct, and you can bring a complaint through the CCRB. You can trigger a complaint with the Department of Investigation, and you can trigger a complaint through the Internal Affairs Bureau. The other thing that I think is really important, somebody's dog.
So we got somebody's dog going off, huh? Black Lives Matter. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. So the other thing that I think is important for young people to do is to get engaged with their local community boards. So every community has a local community board where the commanding officer or the executive officer comes to hear and address the complaints. And a lot of times what happens is, I know this from, let me speak specifically to the community board where the 71st precinct is. Last year, I have a client who was picked up on the street, thrown in a cop car, and charged with disorderly conduct. He was simply walking up the street, dribbling the basketball. He didn't even know what was happening to him. He didn't even know what was happening. He's like 5'3", 120 pounds, really small kid. They picked him up, threw him in a car, and charged him with disorderly conduct. We went to the community board meeting to make a complaint, and what we saw is that there were a lot of people that didn't look like us at the community board meeting, and there were a lot of differing interests. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people who are there applauding these types of behaviors by police because it makes them feel safe. And it's important for young people, you young brothers and sisters, to go to these community board meetings and say, no, that's not how you keep a community safe. You keep a community safe through engagement, through partnerships, not through over-policing or violence.
Yeah, it's very important that we are involved in these processes, right? And that even young people. So I know these brothers on the line, have been to a civilian complaint review board, right? And the more that we are present in these meetings and the more that we are present in these spaces, the more our voice is heard. And so thank you so much for expanding on that, brother. And so that actually leads me to shift into a question I have, and I'll let Brother Kareem answer this. When we talk about being involved with civic engagement, why is it important, right, for young people to be engaged and involved with civic engagement? How important is it to vote? How does completion of the census, which is the deadline coming up in August, how does completion of the census or not completing the census impact our community?
That's a great question. Great question. So first and foremost, the youth is one of the most powerful tools we have right now on this planet. Like hands down, like that's not even an argument. Because we, like I said earlier, we are just given these videos and given these opportunities to make change. And if we stay quiet, no change will ever happen. No change will ever happen. And it's very important for us to vote and be involved because, like, I'll shift a little bit. If you are given two options in school, one option you really love and one option you like not really, right? And you don't vote and you want to complain about not getting the option you really like, that's the same thing that's going to happen. If you don't vote for the president, but then you want to complain about not having a good president that's going to protect America, that's going to protect your community, then you really have zero right to complain about that because you didn't take the chance, you didn't take the time out of your day to go vote for your community. Basically your vote impacts millions, right? It can be one vote that can tip the whole scale, right? And it can go from a bad person to a really good person that's going to help protect and serve the community. The census is the same thing. That's helping your community. If you don't fill out the census, you're basically just telling your community, I don't care, you know? You're just putting it behind your back. You're like, whatever happens, happens. So it's very important to have your voice heard. Without your voice and without you taking the time out of your day to serve your community with your voice, then no change and nothing, and the world will never move forward. The way to move forward is to let your voices be heard.
Yeah, and I would say lack of voice leads to lack of resources. Right. And so that's what we need as a people. Right. We need resources. We need to be at the table when these decisions are being made. We need to be in positions. Even more important. That's why you brothers, right, are so important, right? Because you are our future leaders and we need to be in these positions of power in order to make these decisions. And so thank you so much for providing that insight. Did anybody else have anything to add around civic engagement and why it's so important for not only young people, but for our community to be involved and speak out against these injustices?
You know, one of the things that the MTA Police Guardians do when we do our mentoring, we always try to tell young people, if you want to make a change, join the police department. Join the police department. You know, so many times, you know, through all of the bad interactions with law enforcement, and it's even with my kids. Now, I don't want to be no cop. I don't want to be no cop. And then all it continues to do is permeate the same culture that's there. Now, there are people on the job that are just unconscious that may come out of our neighborhood. And you all know what I mean by unconscious. Join the police department and make a change. Yo, I never want to be like that cop that stopped me and disrespected me. I want to help people, give back to my community, and be a good example of what law enforcement should be. I think a lot of the police unions now, they're feeling it. They had an interview, they had a press conference the other day that was very emotional. It just was very, very emotional, you know, with very little substance. You know, it was like a rally cry. But the bottom line is they have to be held accountable when something goes wrong. You know, just like an attorney will defend someone whether they're guilty or not. So the police union heads is going to do the same thing whenever a cop does something out of line. You know, we want them to do the right thing. We know, yo, that guy's guilty as sin. But as the police union head, he has to support them. But it kills the integrity of the entire craft. It kills it. You know, so many times, I mean, it took them a long time to even speak out on the death of Floyd, of George Floyd. It took a long time for the police to say anything. And then they get upset when people are taking a knee. You know, they see brass taking a knee, and then there's a certain segment of the police that get upset with that. How can you get upset with trying to align yourself with the community that you serve? How? If the job is too much, then quit. Go find another job. Go sell newspapers. But this is the job that they've taken. So along with that, they got to deal with everything that comes with that, man. They got to treat the public right. You know, and they have to do the right thing. Those officers stood there and watched him for, 8 minutes and change with his knee on the neck? Who does that? What type of a human being does that? And they just wearing a uniform. I don't see them as a cop. I don't see them as anything to watch that. So we want to get civically involved. We want to be engaged. We want to know your rights. You know, you're only as good as your resources.
Yeah, I do think that it's important to address police culture. And the reason why I think it's important to address police culture is because culture is born out of necessity, right? We develop culture out of our need for things, need for each other, need for service, need for products. And I think that it would be disingenuous to have a conversation about what's happening with police without actually saying that the problem is police culture. The idea that you're coming into a community that you don't know, you're not aware of, that and you're supposed to be protecting, but protecting who? And I think that when we start addressing police culture and the problematic measures that are taken, right? So the idea that a police union won't hold one of its own accountable for a murder,
that's a problem.
That's a problem of culture.
Problem.
The idea that Black Lives Matter is offensive. It's not saying that Black lives are supreme. Black lives are matter more. The idea of saying that Black lives do matter, right, is offensive to some police officers, is a problem of culture. And I think that this is the rub. When we tell kids that they should become police officers, I do believe that there should be a specific framework for how they approach that job if they're going to do that job. And that framework, I think that there are examples. There's Lieutenant Ed Raymond, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with. Like there are examples of having a framework for how you approach that job where you're not going to be considered a good cop. You're going to be considered a good human, but you're going to be considered a bad cop because you're doing the right thing. And I think that that's the rub, and that's the conflict that much of our society is having, and that's why there are protests. That's why, you know, there's a certain segment of the community or society that doesn't understand protests. They don't understand what's happening because they're on the other side of privilege, or they're on the other side of the badge. They're on the other side of the blue. And I think that we do have to have a conversation about the culture of policing.
And speaking to that, I had a question since we're talking on the topic of bad cops. Like, can an officer who is fired due to misconduct get another law enforcement job somewhere else?
Yes.
That's a great question.
Come on. I'll tell you this. What police unions do, if they know that an officer has done something heinous, they will try to level with management and give them the option to resign. See, if you resign, then you probably can go and find another law enforcement job somewhere in the woods. But if you're terminated, you know you're not going to get another law enforcement job. If you're terminated, you know, another law enforcement agency, they don't want that liability. That would be a massive liability to hire a cop, because there's no cop that's going to get terminated unless they've done something that's really bad. But what happens is they'll come to an agreement. You know what? You better resign. Like they'll tell them, you better resign. Don't even try to fight this. So, all of that time that, we saw where Derek Chauvin put his knee on that neck, within all of that time, I can guarantee you, and I'm guessing, but with all that time, they probably had their union say, you better take everything out of your name. You better do this. You better do that. They prepped them so that when they do get smashed and they do get arrested, well, they still have their property in somebody else's name. They still have this. They still have that. But they give them a lot of time the option to resign. And the smart ones resign because they know that if they try to fight it and get terminated, they ain't gonna get a job again with another agency.
Hey, thank you, brother. Thank you for that. Brother Troy, and I know we're kind of coming close to an end, so I want to make sure all of the brothers get their questions out. And I know, Troy, you aspire to go to Morehouse College, right? And that's in the state of Georgia. And, when we talk about state laws, right, and it's interesting, Kareem, you talked about voting, and I know you kind of alluded to, the election of the president. When you guys get of age, I think the most impactful way to vote is to impact the local elections, right? Because those are the state elections, right? Because those state laws sometimes vary from state to state. And we had mentioned, Brother Trayvon Martin earlier, and I know you had a question in particular, Brother Keith White, as it relates to a law that allowed for George Zimmerman to get off. And I know you're headed down south where Ahmaud Arbery, right, was unfortunately murdered. So you had a question for Brother White around a particular law.
I was actually down there, I think the same week he was murdered too. And I didn't hear about it. It was crazy. And when I got back and I heard about it, I was kind of scared. And I talked to a lot of Morehouse brothers. They told me, you'll be okay. But main thing I want to ask, what is the stand your ground law? Does it exist in a lot of my brothers want to know, does it exist in New York?
So the stand your ground law is a law that allows you to use deadly force to protect your person. So if you are being attacked or you feel like you're reasonably being attacked, then the stand your ground law allows you to use deadly force to defend yourself. Stand your ground is not the law in New York. New York has something similar, which is the Castle Doctrine. Castle Doctrine says that you can use deadly force to defend your home. But once somebody is in retreat, say somebody tries to break into your home and you catch them and they start running. Once they retreat, you have a duty to you no longer are allowed to use deadly force or any force. And so it's important to know those distinctions. But stand your ground is law in Florida. I believe it's still the law in Florida and in some other southern states. And the concept is basically that you can use deadly force to defend, to stand your ground, essentially, to defend yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important. Let me just say this, though. It's important to say that it's not just the standard is not some brick and mortar standard of somebody's in your face doing something. The standard is your present mind state. So if you reasonably believe, right, that's the question. If you reasonably believe that someone is threatening your safety, right, then that's how the stand your ground law applied in Florida. And so that was the basis for Zimmerman's acquittal, right? The basis for Zimmerman's acquittal is that the jury found that he had a reasonable basis for believing that he was being threatened, even though he wasn't.
Yeah, that was.
Crown.
No, go ahead, Troy.
Oh, for the Crown doctrine, is it biased to only law enforcement? Because I know a lot. My coach, he had to give up his firearms when he came to New York, but he had mixed feelings about that. But is it really biased for law enforcement?
is what biased towards law enforcement? I didn't hear
The castle doctrine.
So the castle doctrine is really about what's in your home. So there's, so if you have guns, knives, or something else in your home to protect your home, and it's legal, then the castle doctrine applies. If you don't have a license for a firearm and you use it in your home, you can still be charged with criminal possession of a weapon, along with any other accompanying charges.
Okay, thank you, brother. And again, we're winding down, so I'll leave the last question for both Sergeant Hakim and Mr. White from Kareem. Right, I know we've had a very great conversation, but there was a question you had for both of them around the timeliness of this conversation, even for younger guys. And what exactly is that last question?
When should parents begin speaking with their kids about what to do if stopped by the police and their rights if they are? So it's just when should parents really start telling their kids like, yo, open up?
I think that's a very, that's an unfortunate question, right? It's a very tough question. I'll say this. Parents should start talking to their kids about their humanity and their value as human beings from birth. And I think that when parents are having conversations with their children about their value from birth, then it's not such a jarring conversation to then say there are certain people in this planet who don't value you, or there are certain people on this planet who don't understand the value of life or things. And those are the people that you need to be mindful of. And so I think that whether a police officer has a uniform or whether it's somebody who doesn't have on a uniform, right? There are people out here who mean to do harm. And I think that this is how I frame it with my kids. I don't place a distinction between police officers or bad police officers and other people who may be trying to do them harm. There are people out here who do not value you, and you need to be mindful as you grow and develop that you need to protect what you're growing and developing. And I think that will then lead to a more organic conversation with kids and saying, hey, sometimes there are people who become police officers for the wrong reason. And those people who become police officers for the wrong reason, they may approach you, and they may approach you in a way where you need to defend yourself and protect yourself. But the way to defend and protect yourself against the state sanctioned people who are there for the wrong reason is different than the way that you need to protect yourself if someone else is not state sanctioned. And I think that that's how you frame the conversation, so that kids are not brought up thinking that they are automatically enemies of the state just by virtue of their existence.
But what I would do, I've spoken to all of my children through the historical perspective of a descendant of a slave. I teach them that their history predates slavery, and that their ancestors had to go through massive turmoil for your existence to be where you are right now. I teach them to value themselves, and I teach them to, in the good words of the good doctor, judge a person for the content of their character, not for the color of their skin. Yet I educate them on our history, where our skin color is not always looked at in a very good light. And I let them know, even amongst our own kind, there are some that hate themselves. I take each person for who they are and judge them for their character. And you'll never go wrong. And that conversation about being careful with law enforcement, all of that should be interwoven in your conversations with them when they're very young. It is unfortunate, like Brother White said, but it's a conversation nonetheless that we have to have, and hopefully, we won't have to have that in another 20 years, hopefully.
Right. Thank you for that, brothers. Again, great insight, great answers for the young men. I'm sure that they are very appreciative, right, of the knowledge and wisdom that you guys gave today. So what we do normally, right, to close out our Staying Clear Through Crisis series is I actually ask the young men about a quote that comes from one of the house icons across the Eagle Academy Network. And each Eagle has a variety of house icons who are men of color, who that they can pattern their own behavior, thoughts, and actions behind. And so I give them a quote and I ask what their interpretation is. And I want you to give your interpretation, brothers, as it aligns to this struggle, the struggle of revolution. All right. So I'll start with Brother Troy from Eagle Queens. You know, I know you guys have a Colin Kaepernick house, so I'm going to throw a quote to you from Colin. And again, let me just say this, right? That we had a lot of athletes that have protested well before Brother Colin, right? That go all the way back to Jesse Owens. But the quote that I have from Colin is, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything.
It's just like for C.L.E.A.R, I feel like it kind of aligns with children. It would be leadership. As a leader, you have to believe in something. Like I said in other times, that you have to believe in something, no matter what. And resilience. And a lot of times in your life, though, you have to be a leader. And there'll be times where you feel like you can't believe in this. There's nothing to believe in, but you have to find a way to find something that keeps you going. Find something and help you through. Like, I know there's a lot of times I wasn't gonna make it through. I said, all right, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for my mom. I'm gonna make sure my mom is okay. Or I see that a lot of people was watching me. A lot of young brothers watching me. So I said, all right, bet I'm doing for them. So I'm gonna do it for them, so that they know that at the end of the day, if I make it, they can make it just like me.
Well, thank you, brother. Thank you. And there's an old saying for you young brothers, right? It says, a man who does not believe in something will fall for anything. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, those that have given their lives for this struggle, right, at the cost of giving everything, right, they believed in something and they fought for that. And so, again, you know, that's one of the reasons why we pour libation, right, is because it's very important that we never forget the sacrifice of those that came before us, right? When we talk about a brother Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, they sacrificed their lives for this cause. And so we have a duty to keep this going until equality is across the board. So thank you for that answer, Brother Troy. I'm going to shift to you, Brother Justin. I have a quote from Arthur Ashe, right? There's an Arthur Ashe house in Eagle, Brooklyn. And for those that don't know, Brother Ashe, right, phenomenal tennis player, but was even more of a revolutionary for his community. And the quote that I have for you is, success is a journey, not a destination. The doing is often more important than the outcome. What does that quote mean to you?
So I think that quote really speaks to what we're going through right now. It's kind of reminiscent of how, you know, every time we see these murders of Black men before, like George Floyd, it was always, that's bad, and then we just move on, or we just forget. And George Floyd really set like a goal for us that we need to stop being stagnant. And even though, you know, like, it can't change overnight, the whole system can't change overnight. Everybody's not gonna, you know, but we gotta keep pushing forward and keep going forward, because at the end of the day, if we keep doing what we gotta do, whether that's protesting or changing policies or speaking out or protesting, it's gonna be for the benefit of the whole entire community. So we gotta keep pushing, and that's what really, success is a journey, and it's not overnight.
That's a phenomenal answer, brother. And again, even as we talk about just being a revolutionary, you know, the work that we're putting in now is for your kids, right? When you guys get older and you have children, so that they don't have to endure what we currently do. So I think that's a fantastic answer. And last, I'll shift to Brother Kareem, who there's actually not El Haj Malik El Shabazz house at Eagle Staten Island, but I thought it was fitting to give a quote for him, and I know that you have great admiration for brother Malcolm X, right? That's his other name that he's known as. And so the quote I have for you, Kareem, is, "You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom." What does that quote mean to you, brother?
That quote to me is pretty self-explanatory, because when he says you can't separate peace and freedom, I don't see them as two separate words. I just see them as a combined, conjoint one word, peace and freedom. Because if you're not at peace, if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel comfortable, then you don't feel free. You don't feel like you have the right to go out and be who you are. If you're not at peace with the cops, for example, right? If you don't feel comfortable with the cops, you're not gonna feel the need, or you're not, because we see this time and time again when a brother dies by due to police brutality, and they just keep moving on and on. That just puts in our heads like nothing is gonna change. So that brings you down whenever you're not comfortable, whenever you're not at peace. You don't feel the freedom to go out and change the community by voting, change the community by going out and protest, change the community by completing the census, like we said earlier, changing the community by just coming and listening to conversations such as this one, and get information and just pass on that information.
Another fantastic answer. And again, I almost feel like when I hear "no justice, no peace," right, as a rallying cry, it speaks directly to that quote. So again, brothers, thank you so much for those fantastic answers. I want to thank this fantastic panel. Brothers, please give our Sergeant Hakim and Brother White a round of applause again for the information that they gave.
That's my pleasure, man. That's my pleasure.
And for us, we're going to applaud you, young brothers, right? Because again, man, to be the leaders that you are, to step up and have this conversation is beyond important. You know, when we started this series, you know, it was entitled "Staying Clear Through Crisis," and Troy alluded to that acronym CLEAR, right? Be confident, the confident leaders that give 100% effort towards their academic excellence and who are resilient, right? So CLEAR stands for each different element, right? And it was entitled "Staying Clear Through Crisis" to really address the COVID crisis. But this is a series that is going to continue. I know that this is the season finale, but this is a series that is going to continue into next year, because beyond COVID, until we as Black men are equally treated and we are no longer victims of police brutality and oppression, we will stay in the crisis. And so we need you young men, right, to never forget that. We need you to remind each other to stay clear through that crisis. And so though this is the season finale, right, and this is to the audience, this is a series that is going to continue into next year, where we lift the voices of our young men. So I just want to thank all of our supporters. I want to thank all of the guests who have been on the show over the past 8 weeks, all of those individuals that have tuned in. And that is not just a phrase. When we tell young men that we need you to stay clear, you know, be boldly confident, right? Don't just be confident, be boldly confident. Be bold in your leadership. Be bold in your effort. Be unapologetically academically excellent, and certainly unapologetically resilient, right? When you step into these rooms and you step onto the college campuses for the young brothers that are graduating, know that you have a place on that campus, right? You've gone through 7 years of Eagle Academy. You are certainly ready. You are certainly prepared. And I just want to say, I thank all of the guests that have been on the show. I thank all of those that have tuned in. And I thank, again, just all of the educators from across the network that put in work to make sure that our young men stay strong and they stay resilient through the storm, whether it be COVID, police brutality, unemployment, health disparities, all of the crises that we as a community face. So again, I thank everyone. So as we do with every episode of Staying Clear Through Crisis, we will close out by reciting the poem Invictus, which is a source of resilience and inspiration for our young men, written by William Ernest Henley, you know, as a form of constantly reminding himself to stay resilient no matter what the storm. And so, gentlemen, let's say it strong, let's say it proud. This is the season ending rendition of Invictus. So let's make sure our audience feels it when we say it. Invictus straight.
Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul.
In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried out aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but I'm bowed.
Beyond this place of wrath, tears, room with the Lord is shade. Yet the minutes of the years find it shall find me unafraid.
It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul.
We are the masters of our fate, captains of our soul. Thank you again so much for tuning in to this fantastic episode. For those that tuned in, be sure to tune in again, right? If you have a little brother, a nephew, make sure you have them sit down and hear the jewels that were dropped. Love you, brothers. Thank you so much again for your time. Enjoy the weekend. And remember, young brothers, over the summer, remain eagle clear. Those confident young men that are leaders who give 100% effort towards your academic excellence and overall are staying resilient. We love you, brothers. Be well.
Y'all too, man.
You too.
Blessings.